Hey listeners, DM Shea here. I know I can speak for both of us when I say this. Kyle and I are super thankful that you take time to listen to our podcast every time it downloads. We are super thankful for that. The reason I'm bringing this little clip to you is because when we recorded this specific episode, Kyle and I had just our email, dungeonmastertalk@gmail.com, to give us a chance to meet you, the listener, and have you give us feedback or comments or questions and things like that. But we hadn't started anything as far as social media platforms were concerned. I'm pleased to announce right now that we actually have recently launched an official Facebook page and Twitter handle. If you would like to connect with us on Facebook, you can find us on the Dungeon Master Talk podcast page. You can also find us on Twitter at DMT the podcast, as well as use the hashtag Dungeon Master Talk. As of this moment, Facebook and Twitter are the only two social media platforms that we are on, but who knows, that might change in the future. Again, thank you for joining us on Dungeon Master Talk. With that, here is our latest installment of the podcast.
Welcome to Dungeon Master Talk, a podcast for Dungeon Masters by Dungeon Masters. I am your co-host, Kyle.
And I am your co-host, Shea. Kyle, I am excited once again to be in here talking about Dungeons and Dragons.
Dude, me too. I could talk about Dungeons and Dragons every night if you let me. I think it's our wives that would step in and say, hey, we miss you.
But on that note, we should really thank them for letting us get this medium going so that we can let our nerdiness just not affect them.
I think that's a good point. We should really take this episode to say thank you. Thank you to everyone who's made this possible, and we would be hugely amiss to not list our wives at the top there. So thank you so much, our wives. I didn't ask ahead of time if we can say your name, so I'm not going to. But thank you. And also thank you to everyone listening to this, everyone who's shared this anywhere, everyone who has sent us an email, everyone who has left us a review. It's I can't even begin to describe how much it means to us that you've taken time out of your day to listen and do all those things I just mentioned. It is like, just seriously, thank you. I'm struggling to say in words how great my extent of gratitude is here.
Same here. I mean, it really means the world to us that you would give us your time of day in whatever you're doing. Talk about being a dungeon master in the game of Dungeons and Dragons, and that you would spend that little bit of time with us every week or every other week, to either learn about the game a little bit more or just listen to two guys ramble about it and offer insights that we've kind of started to learn over the years. So, Kyle, I'm kind of excited about this topic today just because I think this is something that happens more than either DMs want to admit or are willing to admit. And honestly, before I go into it, we need to give a shout out to one of our listeners. He actually sent this topic into us to be discussed. So just want to say thank you to Michael real quick for doing that. But the biggest thing that he had for us is talking about the live stream, like D&D podcast or like the actual live play podcast that you listen to or see on YouTube or in the podcast realms and things like that. And his question was, how does our history of live plays affect our expectations of being a DM, basically, is what it came down to. And I think this is really important because especially for maybe newer or maybe not quite as set in their ways type dungeon masters, this can be a really hard topic to overcome, even if it's not necessarily one that they actively think about. I think it's just one of those things where it's okay to not be like those guys on the interwebs or YouTube or whatever. Like, you in this game get to be you, and you get to run the way you understand and you feel comfortable running the game. So I guess, Kyle, do you want to jump in on that a little bit?
Yeah, so I started DMing in, I think it was 2019, or was it 2018? Somewhere in that realm. It was either very late 2018. Yeah, 2019. And prior to being a dungeon master, I had gotten heavily into listening to several D&D podcasts, live play ones, and several that were kind of like this, meant to just more discuss the game. And I would be remiss if I didn't admit here that definitely impacted my expectations of probably the first 12, 13 sessions. That sounds like a lot. We played a little bit more early on than we do now. So it wasn't that like over the course of a year, I was still heavily impacted by this, but definitely my initial sessions I was. I had an expectation for how things would flow in the game that were unrealistic because these podcasts are edited. And that's a good thing. That makes it more enjoyable. We edit our podcasts. Well, at least we try to. And so hopefully
Yes,
you guys
yes.
don't hear every that we have every time that I smack my desk because I talk with my hands or anything like that. But in
He
these
does a really good
sessions,
job of talking with his hands. I mean, for an audio podcast, he does a pretty good job.
they're moving around like crazy and you guys can't see them. But I had an expectation for the flow of things that was unrealistic because in these live plays, it seemed like nobody ever had questions. Nobody ever had to look up a ruling. And that's not the
good.
case. As a DM, I'm looking up stuff all the time. We play for 4-ish hours at a time because we start semi late because we have some people in our group that have families. We also have people who are getting off work. So we play kind of starting that mid-evening time, and then we want to end in time for people to get full night's sleep because we're all getting older. And so I spend a good amount of that time sometimes looking up rulings, letting my players talk during it. And I was so stressed out trying to find these rulings fast when I first started out. And that was probably honestly one of the smaller things that I was really affected by listening to these podcasts, but it's one that really sticks out to me now because here in a semi-recent session, we had a question about a spell, and so the wizard who wanted to cast it, and I was looking through the player's handbook, he was looking through the app that he uses, and we were trying to find this answer. Everybody else kept talking. It took us about like 20 minutes to find the answer, and then we kept going. And I think if that would have happened 3 years ago to me, I would have probably been physically sweating over the amount of stress that I had trying to find this ruling that was taking me so long. Also, I think before we get further into this, because I don't want it to sound like we're harping on these live plays.
Oh, no, absolutely not. No.
These live plays have done a lot of good for the game. It's exposed this game to people who maybe they had heard of it, but were never going to be willing to give it a shot because they had a skewed vision of it. So there's so much good that comes out of live plays being available, and I'm not going to stop listening to them. I love listening to live plays, but as a DM, it's so important for you to be your own dungeon master. Don't be me again. Don't be Shea again. Don't be anybody else that you listen to online. Be yourself.
Yeah.
You have strengths that you're going to bring to the table. I guarantee you, even if you're a day one DM, there's something that you're naturally better at than I was. And you might even be naturally better at it than I am even after 3 years of trying to get better at it. People have strong suits. Lean into your strong suits. And also find out from your group what they want out of it. And include these conversations in your session 0. I think for me, a big expectation I had was the level of role play. I thought that going into it, I could paint a very small scene and my players would jump in instantly to role play. I hadn't yet learned the importance of character hooks. Shea, did that affect you at all?
Yeah, and I think it affected me a little bit differently because of the previous games that I had too. And going back in your comment, like of even as a day one DM, you're better at stuff than I am, which is true. Like there are things even as a day one DM that you might be better at than some of these guys that have been doing this for 30 years. I mean, just because we're not like highly trained, actors or actresses or have all these awesome abilities, that doesn't mean that you can't do something better than them. And it's not the fact that like I'm better than them or they're better than me. Really, it's like I am representing the game in my own way. I get to lead the game in my own way, just like they get to lead it in theirs. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. But the biggest thing, like it's kind of a thing of comparisons, really kind of like keeping up with the Joneses. And I think sometimes when, especially for DMs, like, because we want to be original, we want to be authentic when we make our characters, like our NPCs, we want to make them exciting. And sometimes that's, having a look that they give the PCs. It's a voice that they give them. And I would honestly love to give my every NPC a different voice and be able to do that. And that's unfortunately not something I'm very good at. But something what I do in context is I've gotten to the point where I'll say, okay, in a Scottish accent, this person replies, and I'll say whatever I needed to say. And so then my players kind of have an interpretation of like, this is where I'm trying to go with it, even though like I know that my voice does not do that naturally well. So that's me playing to my strengths and going with the same, this is where I'm trying to go with it. It might not inherently sound the same, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So I think the biggest thing, honestly, is to answer your question, coming back full circle, with me having been a D&D player for a little bit longer than most of the guys had when we first started our group. I think for me, it was a little bit more natural because that was something I was used to. I think, especially when you have groups that are very new to the game, and they, especially if they're new to the people around them at the table, it's going to be hard for them to kind of open, not everybody's just going to be an open book all the time and just jump in willy-nilly into the story. Because when you act, you're exposing a side of you that people may or may not like. If you're playing a flamboyant bard, for he or she's just a very lively person, jovial and singing and dancing, and that could be, if you're naturally an introverted person, that can be, it's hard for you inherently because that's just not you normally, but B, doing that in front of people would scare
So much harder.
the living snot out of you. So just embracing if you embrace yourself with the character, like you kind of like think, okay, for this little bit of time, I'm going to become this character, and I'm going to, or this NPC, and I'm going to do whatever it is I had written down for this NPC. That will kind of help take out some of the awkwardness, I think. But I think also, if you're willing to do that, that's going to show somebody else, okay, this person can be a little bit out there. I'll match them a little bit. Or, that'll give me a chance to say they have a fighter that always has fireworks in their back pocket. And every time something happens, they have to light a firework, like whatever the quirk is, like it gives, when one person kind of cracks that ice, another person will put another crack in that ice and another crack in that ice. And then boom, eventually you guys will all be submerged under that water of the storyline, and you'll be able to allow those characters to really come to life. And then that's where the bonding happens. Like, and for me as a DM, I think the more I put myself out there, that allows my players to know that it's safe. It's a safe place for you to be whatever that character is that you're playing that night, or for that campaign, whatever you guys have set up. The more that you can immerse yourself in that part of the story, I think that will also help your players in turn come together and be immersed in that as well. So that would kind of help offset some of that comparison, I guess.
Yeah. Also, as the DM, you kind of have a unique opportunity here where you can help players out with this, because if you're like I was a new DM with new players. I had Shea as my experienced player, and he coached me a little bit ahead of time, and he was like, "Hey, make sure you have a combat in this first session." And he was right. Having the group come together at first, their role play initially, it was pretty awkward, and some of them were trying to feel it out more than others. We got into the first combat, and the first ever crit fail in the history of the campaign happens, or the first ever critical success happens, or people go good. They start to feel more natural. The game starts working, start getting more familiar with the character sheet. Fun stuff happens. Maybe your party ends up throwing a rogue, and they get into it, and it'll just happen naturally by getting into the game.
I don't know who would have ever thrown a rogue before. I mean,
I think he's my co-host.
I wouldn't point fingers necessarily, but he kind of looks like a druid. So, hey.
He had shiny freckles. And I really do think, though, the key here, everyone, I think we kind of need to open the veil a little bit with this topic. I'm going to let everyone in. I did not expect that. I'm throwing off my game now.
You're welcome.
I'm going to let everyone know a secret that's not so secret to our wives, but probably everybody else listening doesn't know this. Before our episode 0 that you guys got to listen to, there was like 4 different renditions that we were happy with some aspects with, and we weren't happy with others, before we finally said, you know what, this one's good, this one's close enough, this one's good enough.
Yep.
And I guarantee that's going to be the case with most. I'm not going to be bold and say all, because some of these groups that came together and started doing a live play, they might have been playing together long enough and knew each other well enough that they could. But most of them, they took some shots at it. I guarantee you they all had conversations about it long and hard before going in.
Oh, sure.
Keep that in mind when you're starting your first campaign. But then if you're coming in after the fact, maybe you're a new DM and you were listening to several live plays, and now you've come in, you've had 3 sessions, and you're just going, man, outside of the combat, I'm having problems getting my players to engage in the role play. And listening to these, I didn't think that this was going to be hard. And the first thing I want to do is I want to encourage you to keep having D&D sessions, keep playing, and keep trying, because it will click. It takes time for different players, and some players love combat. So have that conversation with your players. Is it the combat side that they're actually really looking for? If that's the case, that doesn't mean eliminate roleplay. That means you can
Oh,
kind
for
of
sure.
lean into that combat to get that comfort level up in the play session, and then introduce your role play. So maybe try to have a beginning and end combat to your sessions that sandwiches the role play. So they start in their comfort zone, end in their comfort zone, but you take them out of it in between. And then as
Hmm.
that out of it, the comfort zone part becomes more comfortable, you can decrease that combat time and increase that role play time. But also remember, character hooks are very key. So if
Yes.
you do not have backstories from your players, for your next session, have the backstory writing party. I We
That's
did
an idea.
sort of kind of that with at one point with our session 0, where we kind of bounced ideas off, but then we broke out. But have or just meet with them one on one in between, hash out some backstories so that then you have the opportunity to hook them in. Or if something's happened in combat, like somebody is really in love with their, like, you have a warrior that their only thing is that they have like this special sword, use that as a hook. Have that sword like act up, or have it become a key part to the campaign. Find that hook to pull the player in, and then find that another hook for the next player. Keep trying to hook the players in to have something to invest in until you get to that point where they are doing the conversations amongst each other and you as the DM are getting to sit back and enjoy. But I want to let you know that does take time. I know I
Hmm.
said in a previous episode that a couple of my favorite sessions were the sessions that I really didn't say much. Those were definitely not early on sessions by any means. We were playing for a while before we got to
Yeah.
those.
And I think too, because when you get your D&D groups together, you'll typically have an experienced player. Like I have a guy in my campaign. I think he's literally played almost every edition of D&D. Like he has been playing for so long. He's gone through second edition, I think, all the way up to 5e. And I think he still plays like Starfinder and things like that every now and again. But you have your guys that have been around a long time, and you can lean in on those guys to say, hey, I need your help in trying to help get some role play going. Like I will be as immersed as I can, but I'm going to need some help with this. I think sometimes it might be a conversation of, some of your players, they may never be as open or as dramatic as you initially thought that they would be, and that's perfectly fine. Like if your group is gelling, I mean that's just going to be their style. That's going to
Yep.
be their personality, whatever that ends up being. So it's not that they're not playing their character well. It's just they're playing them differently, and there's nothing really wrong with that. As long as they're engaged in the story, they're asking questions. They're not just trying to like walk off and dig a hole to the center of the universe. I mean, I think there's nothing really wrong with that. Something you had mentioned earlier about processing. A lot of the ones that we listen to on a regular basis, if they have a question outside of the game, they've probably muted their mics and they're away from the mic. So they're probably asking the question while it's happening. We just don't know it because we don't hear the audio.
Exactly.
It's one of those things where like, they could be discussing something that's off mic and then they come back and they've already figured out what they need to figure out and they keep going on. I've even heard a couple of them where they'll actually put edits in where, if they come to a point and they need to set up for a fight, they'll actually stop the audio and then they'll start it again when it's, ready to go. So like we're missing some of that actual time because they've only captured the game time
Yep.
part of it. You know what I mean? So that's something to keep in mind too, is it's studio production because it's studio production for a reason. When you're playing at home, unless you're trying to make your own podcast, I mean, you're going to be running into the same issues that they are. We just don't hear it because we didn't cut out that time to set up a map or look up a question or whatever the case may be.
Exactly. And I think that's the number one thing to remember is the motives for behind why they're playing and the motives behind why you're playing have that little bit of a difference. Yes, they're playing because they want to play, but they're also playing to have that story told the audience, the showcase side of it. Whereas my session, Shay's session, and the majority of our listeners' sessions, we're having them for the sake of playing the game. So we're
Yes.
coming together to play the game. We're not trying to build it up for somebody else's pleasure. And so that because of that, your outcomes are different, your interactions are different. You're not trying to think necessarily what's going to be the most fun, or, well, not the most fun for somebody else to consume it, but you're going to be thinking what's the most fun for me in the moment. And so that's going to result in different outcomes, because maybe what's most fun for you in the moment isn't, this bold character driven monologue, but is
Yep.
this wacky little interaction with the NPC or with another player, or it's to beat this boss to get the XP to level up because you want to min max your character. And I think a lot of this for us as DMs is remember to always touch base with our players on expectations, so that
Mm-hmm.
you know what they want to get out of the play group, and you know that they know what you want to get out of it. That was a really weird
Yeah.
way to say that sentence.
Yeah, well, basically, like you said, I mean, you're coming to an agreement with, okay, I will meet you halfway here if you can meet me halfway over there, and then after that happens, then you guys can keep moving forward. But I don't know, it's one of those things where it's hard because we're human, and I think it's one of those things where because we're human, we want to. I think there's just like this, there's this innate thing in all of us that we're just like, I want to either be the best at something, the best that's ever been to do this, or I want to have made such a great memory of something that people will always remember me for.
Yep.
And credit to the guys that have gone before, like Kyle and I, in talking about being dungeon masters, and the people that will come after us, or the people that are doing live plays for D&D, and the guys that will do them eventually. It's one of those things where you always get you can always learn something from every DM. You can always
Exactly.
learn something from every player, that you've ever watched, ever interacted with, ever played with. There's always something. Like, I know one DM, I really love how he describes a scene, but he doesn't describe how the characters feel. And to me, it's interesting because he allows the players to make the decision of how their character feels for themselves. He's like, he would say, okay, this is what the general public is doing, and then the character ew, or they're like, okay, I'm gonna fight or whatever. I love another DM because he does a great job of like describing the world. He does a great job of like making sure that every aspect of the world is filled out and that everything has a purpose and a reason for being there. There's other DMs that I love to listen to because they do such a great job of setting the scene. They do a great job of like, okay, as the party comes into this tavern, there's this going on, this going on, this going on, blah 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 blah. And then you can keep going on and on and on. Different, like we said earlier, different DMs are going to be great at different things because that's just how we're wired. That's how we're all built. We're always going to be better at some things than others. As DMs, we can always learn different things from them. Not to take them and criticize ourselves with that information, but to say, okay, this is my interpretation of how they're doing it. Is this something I can use in my game? Okay, great. I'm going to try that next time. And if it works, awesome. If it doesn't work, maybe listen to a different DM and see if he does it in a way that makes better sense to you, or don't fight it, embrace it. Embrace the differences and use that to make yourself better.
Right. And one thing, guys, don't be afraid to try. Don't be afraid to try out stuff. If it doesn't land with your group, then it doesn't land with your group. The only caveat I say to that is if it's going to be like a shocking thing, like you liked this DM because they went really deep and emotional at this level. For that level stuff, I say have a conversation with your group first, because you don't
Yes.
want to go somewhere that's going to be shocking and heavily emotional for people in a way that they don't want to go in their escapism time. But otherwise, if like you hear us talk about something and you go, ooh, I don't know if I could be good at doing that situation or that type of practice, give it a shot in a one-off. Or talk to your players like, hey, would that be something that would interest you if I gave this a shot in an upcoming session? And if they're yes, then go for it. If it doesn't land, it doesn't land. And then you just find the next thing you're going to try out. I took a huge chance with my party at the beginning of season 2, and I introduced some way wackier NPCs than I had ever introduced before. And a lot of that was because we had just come off of a stretch of pretty serious, for us, about as serious as I think we're willing to go as a group. Stuff we had a player character exit. We had
Yep.
the death of the wolf on team. Not to say that like character deaths can't happen, but this was like bang bang bang, and
Yeah.
so it was like heavy heavy heavy, and
Fight,
so
fight, 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 fight.
yeah, definitely. And it was like it was fun. We all really enjoyed those, but I kind of wanted to take them in a different direction for a bit, kind of do like an emotional palate cleanse for the party. So I introduced these really wacky players, NPCs, so not players, NPCs. And my whole idea behind them was if it's too wacky for this first one, I won't introduce the second one and I'll find a way for them to exit the scenario, become a backdrop.
For sure.
But it worked really well for that first character. It was like, all right, so now I'm going to introduce the even wackier character that was even more like just over the top wackadoo, and it landed really well. The party had a lot of fun with it. It was great for the 4 sessions that he appeared in, that NPC did. And then who knows if I'll ever use him again. It was great for that moment.
That's true.
But taking that shot, I wasn't confident going in that it was going to land.
Just so that everybody knows, we basically went from dungeon crawl, fight, to like what was it, 3 weeks on a cruise ship?
Yeah, and the cruise ship,
basically like Vegas on a cruise ship.
Yeah, it was exactly that. That's exactly what I was aiming for. I had slot machines on there. We had
it was literally the complete opposite of what we could have ever been on in D&D, and they played it beautifully. It was wonderful.
Yeah, and
my druid probably spent more time in the ocean than he did on the boat, but that's neither here nor there.
Right, and the character that I introduced, I talked about here, he was loud and boisterous, referred to himself in the third person, claimed to have done all these mighty feats.
Yep.
And it would just pop up, like my characters would be talking and I'd have them just pop up to interrupt them, to disrupt a little bit, to just kind of make this more lighthearted feel of these sessions. And then now we're probably going to get back into more of that dungeon crawl, fight, heavy role play with that comedy being a little bit more spread out or less pre-planned by me and more organic by the players. And then if we need another breakup moment like that, I might try to do something similar or try out something new just to kind of break the rut, so to speak. But I think as DMs, we got to remember this is for fun for us. We're meeting together in a group, just trying to have a good time with hopefully some good buddies of yours around a table. And so if whatever you're doing, if it's ever not landing for you or you're not enjoying it, have that just, be communicative with your group and be willing to try out new stuff. Sometimes it's good to say, hey, maybe for a couple sessions, let's have some one-offs. Maybe have somebody else take the role of DM so you can be a player for a minute, take that stress off, then come back and give it another go. And I think that can be super helpful to just kind of reset that expectation layer and give it a shot again.
Yeah, and kind of doubling back. And sorry, I just thought about this. So I know that one pretty popular DM in particular, he every now and again will send all the other players out of the room and he'll talk to do a one-on-one with some of his players. And I watched that and I was like, that's actually kind of a cool idea. So I actually did that a little bit. I didn't actually send the players out because we were all remote at the time. This was a while back. But what I was able to do was I said, okay, I'm going to focus on you for like 5 minutes. Basically, we did like what they call little vignettes, basically. And basically I said, okay, for character, and basically I just used that 5 minutes to do character development. Like he had this vision of whatever happened, and then I focused on the next person, and this person met somebody from their past that just happened to be in the same bar, and one of them ended up being with their drinking buddy for it I don't want to go into too much detail, but basically like I think that kind of helped them, because we were talking a little bit about character, like story hooks and getting that going. I think that allowed them to kind of sink their teeth into the meat of it a little bit. And so then that kind of helped draw some of that role play out. And honestly, I love my group. I love the way that they interact with each other. The dynamics are really, really fun with them. And I'm excited to see where they go as a group in general. But I think the more that you can be comfortable in your own skin as a DM, and And again, it's good to learn from other DMs, and it's good to learn from the experience of those who have done it for 10, 20, 30 years. But don't be afraid to admit where you're good, admit where it's okay to be not good at something.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I would encourage you to work at those, and if it happens to get better, great. If you keep trying and trying and trying and trying, at least you tried.
Yep.
Nobody's going to fault you for trying.
That, like, I'm still not good at drawing maps, people, and it's been many, many, many weeks
that makes
since.
to us.
Well, and I'm still working on giving opportunities for using cover and partial cover in combat. That's not something that me, when I was a player, ever thought of using that. So
True.
then me as a DM, I haven't always given the opportunities to use that. So now I'm trying to
True.
work on making combat more, have more options in the combat for my players to do fun, creative things. That's not natural for me because, again, that wasn't something that I as a player ever took advantage of. So I don't have that skill set to lean back of oh, how would I use X? Like,
Mm-hmm.
how would I use a pile of rocks, or how would I use a broken wall here, or how would I use the fact that there's a high ground Star Wars reference?
Yeah.
So if you have those strengths, if you're a person that does think of that, make your combats fun because that comes naturally to you. If you're like
Yeah.
me and that doesn't come natural, try to challenge yourself to expand on that, and maybe one day you'll get to turn that into a strength. I hope one day to turn that into a strength for me.
Well, just like going from a skinny guy to a rip guy, you got to build your muscles one rep at a time. So, but that being said, guys, again, we want to stress we're not dogging on these live plays that are on the main platforms. Like, we thoroughly enjoy a lot of those live play shows because they're fun to watch. They're funny characters. We really enjoy them. And if there was ever a moment to get to pick their brain, the DM's brain, about how they DM and how they do this and do that, well, first of all, we would fan guy over these people
Oh,
quite a
hardcore.
bit. And then after we got done doing that, then we would sit down and actually ask our questions and figure out how we could get better. So again, it's we're not dogging on them. I don't want you to take that away that we're trying to bash on them. Really, I'm saying don't compare yourself to them. Learn from them.
Exactly.
Learn what they do well, and use that as a tool to get better in your DM style. Use that as a tool to become a better descriptor of whatever the thing is you're trying to describe. Wow, that went over well. I need to go back and study more. But it's just one of those things. Like, I think that's the biggest takeaway for combating this idea of the comparison and like life play syndrome, if you want to call it that. Just don't take it personal that you're not them or you're not at their level. But remember, they had to work to get to where they're at too.
Yep.
They were a new player at 1.2.
Yep. And
so
it may be a situation where you feel like you as a DM, you have some experience. If you're playing with some inexperienced players, remember that at one point in time you were inexperienced too.
Exactly.
And roleplay does come naturally to some people. It did not come naturally for me, and it took me a long time to feel comfortable acting as anything other than how I would in the situations, or not trying to just beat the game. That it took me a while to learn to separate what Kyle, knew from what my character knew in the world. Yep. And so that's something that I, as a DM, I call out sometimes. I'm like, hey, your character doesn't know this. And a lot of times we'll say, this player knowledge, this is what's going on, so that they understand an interaction. But then we remind, hey, character knowledge, your characters don't know this. And that helps with roleplay. But also just remember, everybody's roleplay experience is going to be different. Everybody's roleplay comfort is different. And so helping to nurse that along if they're reluctant to roleplay is part of our role as a DM. But then also you can always have those conversations of like, hey, are you enjoying the roleplay? Is there something I can be doing differently to help you out here? Are you happy with how the session's going? Are you having fun? How do you think that session went? These are all great questions to ask to make your players feel more comfortable coming around the table, virtual or not. All right, guys, we just want to thank you once again for taking time out of your busy schedule to listen to us talk about Dungeons and Dragons and the role of the Dungeon Master. And if, like Michael, you have any questions for us, please hit us up at dungeonmastertalk@gmail.com. And if you're liking and enjoying these episodes, if you are gleaning anything from them, it would help us out tremendously if you would go ahead and give us a review. Doing that really helps us with the podcast placement and really getting our brand out there, because we're not currently really trying to pay for advertisements at this time. So we just appreciate anything you guys do along those lines. It really helps us out. Also, we just really love hearing from you guys in general. So even if it's just you want to share your experiences or you're looking to get a shout out on the show, please hit us up at, again, dungeonmastertalk@gmail.com. And we will see you guys next time.